Today we're going to talk about the custom of Jewish children starting off their studying in school by learning the laws of Torah's Kayanim, which is Parshas Vayikra. And the reason is as follows. Rabasi states in the Medrash, why do we find that Jewish children start learning Torah's Kayanim, Parshas Vayikra, and not seemingly Parshas Bereshis, which is the beginning of the Torah? So he says, because Yavayu Tahirim v'Yisasku b'Tahirim, which means that you should have these Jewish children who are pure, and they should occupy themselves with the studying of the laws of pure sacrifices. So we need to understand, we know exactly what it means, Jewish children are pure. But what does it mean that the sacrifices themselves are pure? Some commentators explain that it means that a person who brings a carbon is either bringing it in a state of purity or he's going to be in a state of purity, and that's why the sacrifices are referred to as pure. But seemingly it doesn't go enough, because the Medrash specifies specifically that the Carbonics, the sacrifices themselves, are pure, and not the circumstances that a person's in or will be is what is being defined as pure. And on the flip side, if the Medrash is specifying specifically that the Carbonics itself are pure, then how come we don't find in the Torah this description? We do find that the Torah will say you have to bring a carbon that is complete or whole, but not specifically tahar. If we go back in history, before the giving of the Torah, we actually do find by Noach, after he was saved from the Mabul, that he brought a carbon, and the Torah specifies that he brought it from the species that were pure. The Gemara asks, how do you have pure by the time of Noach? Seemingly, the laws of pure and impurity were only conveyed to the Jewish people much later, after the giving of the Torah. That's where they learned about these halachas. So the Gemara answers that he brought from animals shasidin litar. He brought from that group of animals that would eventually be part of the category of pure animals. So let's understand what's unique about sacrifices, specifically the learning of these laws by the children, and more importantly, what's this idea of pure sacrifices? So there's a medrash that says that during the time that the Beis HaMikdash doesn't stand, the person who learns the halachas of Carbonics, it's considered as if he actually brought that carbon. And more specifically, the Jewish children learning these halachas, they give the world the energy it needs in order to be fully sustained. So let's talk about Carbonics. Chassidus explains that Carbonics have a very deep source, and their source is even higher than Torah and mitzvahs itself. On a very basic level, a person who transgresses Torah and mitzvahs, he turns to Carbonics, he turns to these sacrifices that was a very mundane practice, seemingly mundane. In other words, taking an animal and slaughtering it and bringing it in the Beis HaMikdash, but that would bring him to a deeper connection with Hashem and bring him to a higher level than he was even before he transgressed something that he was not supposed to do. So what is it about Carbonics? Carbonics, on a surface level, seem very mundane. And it would be logical to assume that if you wanted to connect to Hashem on a deep level, you should use your intellectual capabilities, you should use your emotional capabilities, you should use your speech. But we find that the way to connect to Hashem is through bringing a carbon. So Chassidus explains this concept of a carbon being something that on a surface level seems very, very mundane, very simple, in the sense of you don't find the qualities you would find if someone was occupied on a higher level using more of their capabilities. But the reason is because the carbon has the ability to elicit this deep love that Hashem feels for Yidden that is even higher than any logic and any reason. And it expresses specifically the choosing that Hashem does of the Jewish people over the nations, when on a surface level you can think that they look alike. It says, Halei ach Esav liYaakov. We find that Esav was a brother to Yaakov, but nevertheless, Hashem chose the Yidden. So the Carbonics represent and elicit this deep love that Hashem has for a Yid, the way he is a Guf Gashmi, a physical being, regardless if you see his level of observant being high or less, nevertheless, he's deeply connected with Hashem, and that's what a carbon has the ability to bring out through being brought. Now, going back to the Medrash, what we stated earlier about children learning the halachas of Carbonics, which are pure. So we find that Noach, when he brought this carbon, this is actually part of the davening on Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, where we mention zichronos, we mention remembrances, that we ask Hashem to remember us for good, we mention Noach bringing this carbon, and we mention it that Hashem should remember Noach with love. And the reason being is because Noach came at a time before the giving of the Torah, and even before the Avos, even before the forefathers started keeping the whole Torah, even though they weren't commanded. Noach came at a time even before that. And Noach being saved from the Mabul, and Yidden coming from Noach, and Noach having within himself the Jewish souls that were destined to be brought down to this world, represents this deep connection that Yidden have with Hashem, which is even beyond logic, beyond reason, and beyond their performance of the actual Torah mitzvahs. And therefore, when it says that the children should study these halachis of Carbonics that are pure, it's referring to this pure quality that's found in Carbonics, which is beyond Torah mitzvahs, which represents this deep connection that we have to Hashem. And furthermore, these three stages of Noach, the Aves, and then the giving of the Torah is actually found in the development of a child. First, you have a child before he's able to understand, before he's able to feel and to properly comprehend what's going on. We find that we already start doing Torah mitzvahs, and that's the child going to school and starting learning these halachis. He's learning the halachis of pure Carbonics, and he's a pure child. Later on, we find that he comes to the age of chinuch. Chinuch is the age where he starts getting educated and doing Torah mitzvahs, and he's a little bit older. And then finally, and that would be representative of the Aves. The Aves were age of chinuch. They did the mitzvahs before Matan Torah was given, but it was in order that we should be able to do it later, and they accomplished it through various other ways, but it wasn't on the same level as being commanded after Matan Torah. And then comes the giving of the Torah, which represents a child who's obligated, a girl after 12 or a boy after 13, where they start being obligated in doing the Torah mitzvahs. So when the Medrash says that the children, they start off learning the halachis of Carbonics which are pure, it means specifically the Carbonics being pure, and these children who are at this very early stage, similar to Noach, before even chinuch and before the giving of the Torah, they have the ability to elicit this divine blessing and this divine love that Hashem shows to the Jewish people specifically, and as a result of that gives the world all the energy that it needs in order to be sustained.